Well, good morning. I'd like to thank Mayor Bain, not for not being here, but for making sure we had great weather. I have to tell him that if this is what happens with the weather when he's out of town, we'll send him out of state more often. Vice Mayor Giuliano, Chief Mariola, thanks so much for those kind words, that thoughtful introduction. The more I hear that, the more I realize I'm just getting old. But it's truly a privilege and honor to be here with you today, here in Pepper Pike, to commemorate this most solemn occasion where we honor those brave souls who gave their lives in defense of our great nation. You know, Memorial Day actually started as Decoration Day in 1866, when the graves of Civil War soldiers were adorned with flowers. It didn't become an official holiday until 1971, the last Monday in May, where we honor those who died serving our country in the military. You know, interestingly enough, today's military, we're privileged to have 1.3 million brave young men and women serve our country, comprised of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. You'll hear those service songs shortly, and it'll be nice to see those men and women who served in those branches stand to be recognized. Half of the service members in our country are married. 16% are female, and the average age is 28 and a half years of age. Those are the men and women, along with those dedicated members of our law enforcement and first responder communities that are protecting our freedoms and keeping us safe. It is always appropriate to thank them for their service. You know, Memorial Day is known as the unofficial start of summer, but that's actually a number of weeks away. It's a day highlighted by parades and, as the chief said, barbecues and parties. But truly, it's not a celebration, especially for those Gold Star families who've lost their loved ones. This is not Veterans Day, although we recognize and thank all those who have worn the cloth of this nation. This is a day where we pay homage to all those who didn't come home. This is a day of solemn contemplation over the cost of freedom. It is a day when we hear those 24 distinct notes of taps that we remember the words of the Gospel of John, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." We must never forget, especially on this day, that each and every one of us are beneficiaries of the countless service members' loving sacrifice on our behalf. You know, I grew up in a small rural farming town in upstate New York. One of our rituals, like so many other small towns captured by Norman Rockwell's artistry, was the annual Memorial Day Parade. You know, I first marched in it as a Boy Scout at 11, and then I switched to the high school marching band when I was 14, so I have a kinship with all of you, and I remember those uniforms were hot. But what I remember most about each of those Memorial Days was my father, who was a West Point graduate, a Korean War veteran, and a Purple Heart recipient. He read the Gettysburg Address at our town's Veterans Memorial. Lincoln's words seem fitting today as they did more than 45 years ago when Dad read them, as well as when Lincoln delivered them over 150 years ago. Here's just a portion of that unforgettable speech, and I quote, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have perished in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. End quote. Those are powerful words, even a century and a half later. So what can we do today? Commemorations like this here in Pepper Pike are truly an appropriate way to honor those fallen heroes. Thank you for your city's leadership in arranging this event. You know, we can all commit to not taking our freedom for granted. It certainly isn't free. It's cost the shed blood of thousands upon thousands of dearly departed service members. We can show respect to the flag by standing with our hand over our hearts when it passes by. We can teach our children to do the same. We can thank people in uniform for their service. You know, another thing we can do is we can pay it forward. I routinely run into people who express their regret that they'd never served in the military. I always tell them there are numerous opportunities to help those serving our country. Volunteer for any number of organizations that serve our armed forces. And yes, the Red Cross is one of those organizations. In fact, like the day we commemorate today, the Red Cross has its roots in the Civil War. It was founded by Clara Barton, a nurse who was inspired by the aid and comfort she provided soldiers during the war between the states. Today, more than 136 years later, serving those men and women in the military, your Red Cross continues to do so through our dedicated volunteers throughout the globe and in Northeast Ohio. The Red Cross provides resiliency training and reconnection workshops for families and service members. The Red Cross's Heroes Network helps members of the armed forces get home when their families need them in the case of an emergency. You know, even yesterday, the Red Cross represented this fine nation at the Memorial Day celebration at the Ohio Western Reserve National Cemetery. Red Cross volunteers distributed water from a Red Cross emergency response vehicle, and they had the honor of raising the flags for each of the 5 branches of the armed forces during that ceremony. You know, in closing, back in 2000, Congress passed and George W. Bush signed into law the National Moment of Remembrance Act to encourage the people of the United States to give something back to their country which provides them so much freedom and opportunity. The National Moment of Remembrance Act encourages all Americans to pause wherever they are at 3 o'clock local time on Memorial Day for a minute of silence to remember and honor those who have died in service to our nation. I encourage all of us to join together on this Memorial Day at 3 o'clock, wherever we may be, whatever we may be doing, to contemplate the cost of our freedoms, the freedom to speak our mind, to vote, to live where we'd like, to practice whatever religion we choose, to travel anywhere in this great nation, the freedom to be anything we choose to be, the freedom to dream, because we are all Americans and we can come together to honor those who have given their all so that we may be free. I'll leave you with the inspiring words of the singer Lee Greenwood. You know the tune. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.